Hi everyone, my name is Katie Griffin and I'm a graduate student at East Carolina University. Today, I'm going to look at the German Nutrition Society's position on children adhering to a vegan diet. The objectives of this presentation are to discuss the position and recommendations outlined by the German Nutrition Society regarding children adhering to a vegan diet, examine the current literature to determine the validity of the recommendations, and finally, discuss the final conclusions and recommendations. So there are different types of vegetarian diets. This table is directly from the German Nutrition Society's position paper, and it summarizes the different types of vegetarian diets. So we have pesco-vegetarians or pescatarians. They avoid all meat and all products derived of meat and only consume plant-based foods, fish, eggs, milk, and dairy products. Ovo-lacto-vegetarians avoid meat, fish, and all products derived of meat or fish, and only consume plant-based foods, eggs, milk, and dairy products. Lacto-vegetarians avoid meat, fish, eggs, and products derived thereof, and only consume plant-based foods, milk, and dairy products. Ovo-vegetarians avoid all meat, fish, milk, and dairy products, and only consume plant-based foods and eggs. And then we have vegans, who only eat plant-based foods, and avoid all animal foods and products derived from animal sources such as honey and gelatin. So let's first look at the German Nutrition Society's position on children adhering to a vegan diet. They start off by saying in persons on a vegan diet, there are difficulties with the supply of some nutrients, and this may have unfavorable consequences for health, particularly for people in sensitive phases of life, for example, growth. Phrased differently, they say the risk of nutrient undersupply or a nutritional deficiency is greater in persons in sensitive phases of life, such as pregnancy, lactation, and in infants, children, and adolescents taking or being given a vegan diet. They go on to say that on a vegan diet, it is difficult or impossible to ensure adequate supply of some nutrients. Some of these critical nutrients include protein, EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin B12, riboflavin, vitamin D, calcium, and iron. Overall, their position is that since rejecting any animal foods increases the risk of nutrient deficiencies and thus of health disorders, a vegan diet is not recommended by the DGE during pregnancy or lactation or for children or adolescents of any age. So there are a few key studies that have assessed growth parameters between children following a vegan or vegetarian diet compared to a non-vegetarian diet. This first one is a recent longitudinal cohort study of children between the ages of 6 months and 8 years who were enrolled in the Target Kids cohort study, which took place between 2008 and 2019 in Toronto, Canada. Researchers examined the relationship between vegetarian diet and growth, micronutrient stores, and serum lipids among roughly 8,900 healthy children. Of the roughly 8,900 children studied, 248 were vegetarian, including 25 vegan at baseline. Each child was followed for an average of 3 years, and over the course of the study, they measured the children's BMI, weight, height, cholesterol, triglycerides, vitamin D, and serum ferritin levels. So this is a table with the baseline characteristics of all participants. As you can see, more of the vegetarian participants were supplementing iron and vitamin D compared to the non-vegetarians. The vegetarian group has a slightly lower mean BMI and slightly lower mean height, but not significantly lower. For the weight status, 6.2% of vegetarian and vegan children were categorized as underweight compared to 3.3% for non-vegetarians. And when you look at the normal weight category, roughly 80% of both vegetarian, vegans, and non-vegetarians fell into this category, so very comparable. And the vegetarians and vegans had a lower incidence of overweight or obese BMIs. When comparing the mean and the median serum ferritin levels, which is an indirect measurement of iron levels in the blood, there were no significant differences noted between the non-vegetarians and vegetarian and vegans. And then finally, we've got the serum vitamin D levels. They were also very similar between the two groups. So when looking at the relationship between a vegetarian diet, growth, and biochemical measures of nutrition, researchers found no evidence of differences in the mean ZBMI or ZBMI growth rates between children with a vegetarian or vegan diet and a non-vegetarian diet. and there was no evidence of an association between vegetarian diet and serum ferritin and vitamin D. Overall, there were no significant differences in growth between children following a vegetarian diet compared to a non-vegetarian diet. However, children following a vegetarian diet had a slightly higher odds of being underweight compared to those following a non-vegetarian diet. And there were no significant differences between vegetarian and non-vegetarian children's BMI, height, serum ferritin levels, and vitamin D levels. This next study is the Vegetarian and Vegan Children Study, also known as the VetChi Diet Study, that looked at the overall calorie intake, macronutrient intake, and anthropometrics of 430 vegetarian, vegan, and omnivorous children aged 1 to 3 years old. Dietary intake was assessed using a 3-day diet recall, an online questionnaire that assessed their lifestyle, and anthropometrics such as height and weight. So here we have the results of the study, looking in the 3 box plots here. Figure A is looking at weight for height, figure B is height for age, and figure C is weight for age z-scores of vegetarian, vegan, and omnivorous children in the study. You'll see that in all of these, the researchers reported no significant differences between the median weight for height, height for age, and weight for age z-scores. Researchers also found that the total energy intake and dietary energy density didn't significantly differ between any of the diet groups. However, they did observe significant differences in macronutrient pattern between the diet groups. So where intake of protein, fat, and added sugars increased in relation to the degree of inclusion of animal-derived food, and then intake of carbohydrates and fiber rose with increasing plant-derived foods. This led researchers to conclude that a vegetarian and vegan diet in early childhood can provide the same amount of energy and macronutrients, leading to a normal growth in comparison to omnivorous children. Additionally, the findings assume a normal child development indicated by average anthropometrics in the normal range. So here we have a review article by Sutter and Bender titled Nutrient Status and Growth in Vegan Children. This literature search was completed in 2020 and yielded 437 publications for review. And despite the title mentioning only vegan children, the authors also included vegetarian diets as part of their review as well. The goal of this review was to analyze existing literature on the health and growth impacts of selected nutrients in vegan children. They also assessed the intake of calories, protein, iron, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B12, and folate. So here we have a summary of the included studies with comparisons of nutrient status of vegetarian and vegan children compared to non-vegetarian children. Looking at the energy and protein intake in 1 to 3-year-old vegan, vegetarian, and non-vegetarian children, all groups consumed more than double the recommended protein intake and had no difference in caloric intake. For iron intake, there were 2 studies on vegan children that showed consumption of over 100% of the RDA for iron, except for vegan girls aged 2 to 3 years old who consumed 93% of the RDA. And looking at calcium intake in 1 to 6-year-old vegan children, the mean intake was 53% of the RDA, with pretty wide range between 28 and 85% of the RDA. For vitamin B12 intake, 2 studies that showed insufficient intake in vegan children, but no overt cases of B12 deficiency. Only one of the studies asked participants about the use of fortified or supplemented foods. And finally, looking at folate intake in 2 to 6-year-old vegans and vegetarians, researchers reported significantly higher folate intake compared to non-vegetarian children. So evidence from this review reported that while vegan and vegetarian children generally weigh less than omnivorous children, their weight was within normal limits for age and for stature. Additionally, evidence showed that there were no significant differences in average height between vegan or vegetarian children and non-vegetarian children. And while there was a small percentage of outliers, vegan children showed normal growth and were less often obese. So overall, researchers found very limited evidence that children on a vegan diet can obtain all nutrients through food alone. Therefore, proper diet planning and supplementation by caregivers is needed. They also found that deficiencies in vitamin B12, calcium, and vitamin D were the biggest risks associated with a poorly planned vegan diet. And finally, researchers concluded that a well-planned vegan diet using supplementation is likely to provide the recommended amounts of critical nutrients to provide for normal progression of height and weight in children and can be beneficial in some aspects. So now that we've had a chance to look at some related literature, I want to go back to the German Nutrition Society's recommendations, and they state that persons who nevertheless wish to follow a vegan diet should permanently take a vitamin B12 supplement, pay attention to adequate intake of nutrients, especially critical nutrients, and possibly use fortified foods or dietary supplements. They should receive advice from a nutrition counselor, and their supply of critical nutrients should be regularly checked by a physician. So these are all recommendations that are consistent across national and international nutrition and pediatric organizations. The difference is, that on the contrary to the overall position of the German Nutrition Society, there are a number of organizations that support a vegan or vegetarian diet for children. So here we have both the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American Academy of Pediatrics that support an appropriately planned vegan and vegetarian diet for infancy, childhood, and adolescence. And the Canadian Pediatric Society also states that well-balanced vegetarian and vegan diets with the use of nutrient supplements when needed can meet the nutritional needs of children and adolescents. The key words in all these position statements are adequately planned and well-balanced. It's important to note that with any kind of a restricted diet in growing children, caretakers need to pay special attention in the planning of nutritionally adequate meals and snacks. So nutrients like iron, zinc, vitamin B12, calcium, and vitamin D, these are some of the key nutrients that require careful planning and possible supplementation. Another important factor is the regular pediatrician visits and well checks, which are strongly encouraged to ensure that the status of key nutrients and growth are being monitored. So as I mentioned earlier, there really are a limited number of studies and very conflicting evidence on the impact of a vegetarian and vegan diet on the growth and nutritional adequacy of children. Therefore, it's important that caregivers provide a variety of food options to children following a vegetarian and vegan diet, but also focus on fortified foods and providing supplementation where it's needed. That is one consistency across all of these studies and position statements. So this is a visual that I really like. It's a guide that showcases how parents can adequately provide the nutrients needed for adequate growth and development for their children following a vegan and vegetarian diet. So this is a PB3 plate, and it has 3 primary components, each taking up a third of the plate. So you've got the fruits and vegetables, the legumes, nuts, and seeds, and the grains and starches. You've got the vitamin C containing foods in the fruits and vegetables to help with iron absorption. You've got the calcium containing foods in the fruits and vegetables and the legumes, nuts, and seeds. You've got omega-3 rich foods in the legumes, nuts, and seeds, and good sources of iron in all of these categories. You'll see fats in the middle, which can be added to all 3 of the categories. And on the side, they have the optional soy milk, which is a good source of protein, fat, and micronutrients, as well as the optional supplements, again, as needed. And with that, I'd like to conclude with one final summary, and that is that the German Nutrition Society's position and recommendations are only partially supported by existing literature on the topic. Based on existing literature, there is no significant difference in growth or development of vegan and vegetarian children compared to that of non-vegetarian children when caretakers plan meals carefully, they use fortified foods, and they supplement critical nutrients. Thank you.